Please ask everyone to take your seats, and we have, I think, a few extra seats in the back. I'm happy to see we're joined by some colleagues from the Foreign Ministry also, so it's a slightly larger group, but I hope we have seats for everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes, more or less? Okay, we'll have to speak closer to the microphone, okay. Well, it's really a special honor that I have the chance to begin our afternoon session with such a distinguished guest. President Sampaio, not only 2 times President of Portugal, he has a very special role right now, and the official title is the UN High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations. And it's hard to find a better example, I think, of modern-day cultural diplomacy than that. So I really think I couldn't imagine a better way to begin the official afternoon session on the first day of the symposium than to have President Sampaio. He'll be speaking to us on a topic also that I think in particular speaks to the target audiences of ICD. The topic is intercultural dialogue and the younger generation, the challenges ahead. And I very much like that focus in the sense, of course, the current generation of leaders, there's a large potential. But if you think of the next generation of leaders, that's really where we have a magnificent potential to really make a contribution in terms of new strategies based on soft power, based on cultural diplomacy. So I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in a very warm welcome for President Sampaio. Please.
Sorry? I always have problems with this everywhere, so if anything happens, it's my fault. Well, thank you very much. Let's see if the substance or the eventual substance has anything to do with the title. These things sometimes don't happen. But Your Excellencies and my special good friend, former President of Latvia, Madame Freiberger, ladies and gentlemen, I am very grateful to Mr. Mark Donfried, Director and Founder of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, for inviting me to address this international symposium. And I want to greet all the participants and stress that I feel very happy to have the opportunity to share with you some thoughts on the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations initiative and its role as a soft power in international relations. And I was very satisfied, really, very happy to have heard your overall exposition on soft power this morning. Let me divide my address in 3 parts. The first, I will make some preliminary remarks on the topic of cultural diplomacy, which is the heart, or at the heart of your conference. In the second part, I will make a brief introduction to the Alliance of Civilizations United Nations Initiative. And in the third part, and last, I will give you some examples of the kind of multi-stakeholders action that the Alliance is keen to promote. Now, as to the first part, on the preliminary remarks on the topic of cultural diplomacy. Looking back into history, it is quite easy to agree that diplomacy never had an age of innocence. But considering the roots of modern diplomacy, there was a time when its boundaries were fairly well defined and its actors clearly identified. Diplomacy was practiced by a country's diplomatic service as its army for foreign policy, so to say, with a view to safeguarding national interests in the external arena. The picture today is that the neat and clear boundaries between foreign policy and other policies are increasingly blurring, and this is also the case with the frontiers between bilateral, multilateral, and regional fields of diplomatic endeavor, as well as between the roles played by the various new emergent actors in international relations. With globalization, the steady development of the so-called international community and the ever-growing complex transnational networks, a new way of doing or making diplomacy is rising. It challenges traditional diplomatic culture. It has probably taken away some of the certainties of foreign policy practice, but it has already opened up many new opportunities. To sum up, diplomatic practice today faces in reality a double challenge. It has to deal with transformations in the relations between states, and it needs to take into account the changing fabric of transnational relations and the complex network of non-state actors. The emergent use of a plethora of words to qualify diplomacy, economic diplomacy, for example, cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy, preventive diplomacy, soft diplomacy, hard diplomacy, smart diplomacy, transformational diplomacy, shuttle diplomacy, even ping-pong diplomacy, clearly shows that there is a new environment marked by the new needs and opportunities. Remembering my state visit to Latvia, I remember that I was accompanied by a cultural delegation to show at least some of the very well-established middle-aged Portuguese music, and quite a big number of Portuguese businessmen to start what was the first economic, or to try to start the first economic relations between the two states, in the time when Latvia was discussing the coming in to European Union and what it all represented. And the example of Portugal and its experience was an important motive of our talk. So it's really multidirectional. That is to say, to what extent we are living at a time when the traditional paradigm of democracy, as well as that of foreign policy, is in fact shifting. Cultural diplomacy that this symposium will address is part of the new emerging paradigm. It expresses the major role that culture as a broad concept, I employ culture now in a very broadly concept, the role it's playing in interstate relations and in relations between people. Indeed, long before the term cultural diplomacy was employed, countries have developed extensive and diversified cultural exchanges and cooperations. But nowadays in fact, cultural diplomacy has a much wider scope, and it includes new priorities, such as, for instance, the promotion of human rights, tolerance and understanding, good governance, the role of religious movements in world affairs, and the role of the media in civil society. Because of a number of developments, cultural and religious diversity, social cohesion, and intercultural dialogue have acquired an ever-growing prominent place on the political agendas. Among these factors, we can identify some global trends. A few examples. Permanent migration flows, which change the population makeup of most of the countries around the world, or will necessarily change. New means of communication and the related expansion of media content. An increase in controversies and debates on value systems and identity issues. A reported rise of incidents of discrimination, racism or populism, globalization and geopolitical changes in general, and of course, world politics. To give you two examples, I was inspired by so many examples this morning, so I dare to say a few. In relation, for example, to what happened in the Netherlands with the fitna film. The fact that you had a very recent past around the Danish cartoons, so-called the Danish cartoons. I hate to say Danish, I hate to say, because it's the cartoons of that review and of that designer, and of course, as far as the fitna film is concerned, it's the film of Mr. Wilders, who, by the way, is now at the European Parliament. But anyway, had it not been for the experience, worldwide experience, around the Danish cartoons, the Dutch would probably not have acted as swiftly and profoundly as they did in relation to the fitna film. What was the means they did it? With the civil society, with Muslim organizations, everything. And of course the alliance helped a little bit, a tiny little bit, but of importance. It took 3 months before between the notion that the film was there, was going to be put on the air on TV, and the fact that it did. These 3 months were occupied in kind of a person-to-person diplomacy, which was extremely important. This shows the way in which a combination of the classic diplomatic kind of view, which is vital, and of course on the ground dealing with those who would immediately suffer or at least react to potential consequences. Moreover, Samuel Huntington's prediction that after the end of the Cold War we might witness an intercultural or interreligious clash of civilizations, that 9/11 and its tragic worldwide consequences seemed to confirm, put in fact cultural diplomacy in this broad sense high in the international agenda as a matter of urgency. As we will see, the Alliance of Civilizations makes full sense precisely in this framework as a new United Nations soft power tool to address issues of human security and peace. The second part is precisely dedicated, in a very short summary, to the Alliance of Civilizations United Nations initiative. This idea of an Alliance of Civilizations was put forward for the first time in a speech made in the aftermath of the Madrid terrorist attacks by the President of the Spanish government, Mr. Zapatero, at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2005, at a time when world politics was dominated by the neoconservative approach of the global war on terror. The idea was then backed by the Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, who appointed a higher-level group of 20 personalities to write a report with recommendations, which was presented in November 2006. You can see that on the Alliance's site. Since then, this United Nations political initiative has progressed under the co-sponsorship of the heads of government of Spain and Turkey, and today it has more than 100 members, states, governments, therefore, and international organizations. For instance, all the European Union countries, as well as all the major international organizations, are members of the Alliance. As arguable as the name chosen for this initiative may be, what do the headings matter after all if the issues exist and it is urgent to resolve them on pain that inaction will only worsen them and give them an unsustainable dimension? Criticism, anyway, is rife and to anyone's taste, some looking to the initiative since it appears as an alliance, either considering it as hiding a warlike intention or even a biblical intent. Others condemn it because it bears on civilizations, when on the contrary it should bear on dialogue and meeting of cultures. At any rate, although they keep to a recurrent characteristic, these linguistic controversies, which lead us to think about the famous dispute of the universals, which enlivened intellectual discussion in the Middle Ages, these controversies end up by being overtaken by the pressing reality of the facts, such that the cultural, religious, and ethnic diversity is at the origin of the great divides of our times. This is why I have always insisted not to discuss the name. The name was a train passing through the plain. I went in the train. I was invited to. I'm not going to change the name. The name is now beginning to be well known. But in fact, what is at stake is the dialogue between cultures. I tend to think that civilization is a unique framework in other ways. What we have is different backgrounds, different influences, different cultures as such. Anyway, I will not go into that. Actually, to a certain extent, our world is splitting apart along historic fault lines of culture and religion. So good governance of cultural diversity is a topic issue, not only to foster a culture of peace, prevent conflicts, and contribute to peace building in post-conflict situations, but also to preserve cultural diversity as the fourth pillar of the sustainable development. Not that from this may result an undesirable culturalization of political conflicts, but because it is recognized that many or a few acute and protracted political problems, even if bearing upon land, natural resources such as water and oil, or upon occupation, invasion, or security, these political problems end up by also becoming, very often, conflicts about a fractured national consciousness and about an ever greater complex relationship between culture, religion, or ethnicity. This is why, even in major political harsh conflicts, soft power has a very important role to play, because after all, reconciliation as part of peace building depends highly on cultural and identity issues, narratives and stories built and exchange about conflicts, stories that influence their resolution or contribute to their perpetuation. Just take the conflict in the Balkans, or remember apartheid in South Africa, or the case of East Timor. Three different examples, miles and miles apart, but all of them showing the role of cultural and public diplomacy as a soft power tool to build sustainable peace among people. Take also the 60 years old, in fact, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and see how much we should invest in soft power to influence the behavior of the belligerents in order to get the desired outcome of peace. Now, as you may know, ladies and gentlemen, the Alliance has three main aims. The first one, to address widening rifts among communities and between societies, particularly the so-called West-Islam divide, by reaffirming a paradigm of mutual respect among peoples of different cultural and religious traditions. The second, to help build bridges between societies by countering the stereotypes and misconceptions that deepen patterns of hostility and mistrust, and by promoting dialogue and understanding. And the third one, to help counter the rise of extremism. By achieving these goals, the Alliance aims at contributing to develop what I have insistently been calling the good governance of cultural diversity, an emerging issue of political and policy agendas in our globalizing world. Whether we like to assume it or not, the issue is there. There is cultural diversity of an immense perspective, and you need good governance. You need to deal with that. It's everywhere. In order to de-globalize the above-mentioned goals of the Alliance and turn these general aims into local deliverables, because this is the case which is absolutely necessary, how to have local deliverables, the Alliance is developing two major tools: the national plans and regional strategies for intercultural dialogue. We are now developing, upon request of some of the Balkan countries, a regional strategy on the fields of the Alliance, of course, with partners of those countries and neighboring countries who are interested in seeing what they can do to help this process of dealing with cultural diversity and religious diversity, as we unfortunately all know. This is one. Only national plans for intercultural dialogue, prepared and implemented by member states in close collaboration with civil societies organizations, will allow the introduction or strengthening of good governance practices and to develop in due time valid policies guaranteeing the right to diversity and the culture of peace and human rights for citizens. Education, youth, migration, and the media are the four fields of action for these strategies, and the four fields of action we were mandated to carry on. Let me stress that in the face of the diversity of national circumstances, such national plans, of course, cannot be devised in line with a single model. But on the other hand, intercultural dialogue depends on international law and covenants, on regional decisions and policies, and national legal frameworks outlining basic human, civic, economic, social, and cultural rights. Therefore, the full use of this broad legal framework makes a difference, because intercultural dialogue can only take place in an environment where a person is guaranteed safety and dignity, equality of opportunities and participation, where different views can be voiced really openly without fear, where there are shared spaces for exchanges between cultures to take place. Moreover, this common legal framework may help generating sources of good practice projects, inspire new initiatives, help mapping sector approaches and policies, develop ambitious benchmarks and standard indications or indicators for evaluation and monitoring programs, and open the way towards a common paradigm or strategy for intercultural dialogue. As suggested by some experts, this common paradigm is underpinned by a four-step approach. Four aspects here, 4 steps. First, mapping roads. To identify exclusion or discriminatory practices and develop plans to improve social, economic conditions required in order for intercultural dialogue processes to take place. Second, breaking down walls. In other words, remove barriers to equality and fight against prejudice, racism and stereotypes, introduce incentives or regulatory measures to increase the presence of individuals, their works or ideas which are not mainstream in political, economic, educational and cultural spheres in order to diffuse power from hitherto predominant groups. The third, building bridges. Develop intercultural skills and competencies through educational, artistic and media programs which could equip individuals with the necessary tools to fully and successfully engage in intercultural dialogue processes. And sharing spaces, to create spaces where ideas, experiences and beliefs can be respectfully exchanged. In case of conflict, participants can agreeably agree to disagree, and where interactive communication can freely flow. This could result in a deeper understanding of diverse views or practices, or lead to new creative processes or forms of expression. Ladies and gentlemen, all our countries, and this I say with great determination, if I can put it in this way, my own country, which I love very much, as you can understand, all our countries face the challenge of good governance of cultural diversity. We can't ignore this. We simply can't ignore this. To give you an example, in my country, which is Portugal, we had a traditional migration presence. We emigrated quite a great deal in the 60s and the 70s, here to Germany, for example. But now we have received not only a vast African migration after decolonization, and then an Eastern European migration in the 70s or 80s, and now a Brazilian migration too. So, in fact, suddenly, in the metropolitan area of Lisbon, to speak just of Lisbon as an example, we have normal schools with 20 nationalities in the classroom. 20. We have an immense variety of journals of all types. No one can read them apart from those who can read them really. I went to the place where I was born in the outskirts of Lisbon one of these days and saw the kiosk of the newspapers. And there were dozens which I had no idea. And I asked him, what's this all about? I've known him for years. And he said, well, Russian, Romanian weeklies, Bulgarian, etc., etc. So, I mean, even a country which is known to adapt to this quite well has these new challenges. Church practitioners, quite a different array of churches now in my own country. So, in fact, I wanted, by quoting my country, which of course is the easiest way to deal with a difficult topic, quote your own example, we have this challenge of good governance of cultural diversity. And I am worried with the economic and financial crisis, which in a way will affect employment to an extent where these, even in the countries where this is more or less adaptable, will obviously might at least cause a problem. So this good governance of cultural diversity, it is not only about integrating migrants or minorities. This, in fact, is all about preparing the hearts and minds of all individuals and peoples for the fact that globalization forces us to live in a global village where we are permanently confronted with identity dilemmas and diversity issues. This is all about education, about learning how to live together in our globalizing world, where clashes anywhere are clashes everywhere 1 minute later, and where cultural and religious fault lines divide, in fact, our societies. This is why national plans and the regional strategies are top priorities of the Alliance for the next 2 years, not as a dominating tool, as a dialogue also. And if you are a member of the Alliance as a country, why can't you help us and why can't we help you to see how can you put together what you are doing in this field and compare yourself with this country if they are willing to do so. They are more advanced here. Let's exchange good practices. Let's see. And of course, there are countries who are doing nothing at all. And we hope that the example will at least get there one way or the other. Don't ask me which countries I'm referring to, because I wouldn't tell you. To drive this agenda forward and to deliver results, the commitment and the involvement of civil society, NGOs, voluntary and civic organizations, foundations, local communities, churches, and faith-based organizations, all this involvement of civil society is absolutely paramount. Civil society, in fact, can catalyze action within countries, mobilize broad-based movements, and hold leaders accountable for their commitments. I know this is not entirely popular, at least with leaders, but having been a previous leader, I think I can talk about it because I was also a mayor of Lisbon before. And central governments never like mayors very much because mayors have a diplomatic activity, at least in the twin system movement. And to justify towards the central government that movement between cities of conflicting areas, for example, is a vital tool for an overall policy is not an easy task, but more and more an indispensable one today. Now, this is why a second main priority of the Alliance for the coming 2 years will be to increase its network's participation by developing cooperation and partnerships with all stakeholders and to engage them in concrete projects. The point where the Alliance really makes a difference is precisely in its results-oriented approach, twinned to its mission as a global matchmaker and as a catalyst for joint action. The added value of the Alliance is its ability to build a multi-stakeholders platform with governments, different international organizations, and the various players from civil society in order to implement joint initiatives and to give wider political and strategic coherence to the plethora of ongoing projects and programs. So I was really very happy to see that our logo was in your conference today, and that means that the kind of catalyzing effect, the kind of coordinating, the kind of thing that we have to do things together and see what everyone is doing is vital if we want to address in concrete terms the kind of soft power you were developing this morning. Let me finalize by giving you 2 examples of multi-stakeholders concrete projects. I would like to say the first example regards the Youth Solidarity Fund we operate. The Youth Solidarity Fund is a competitive mechanism which provides seed funding to outstanding youth-led initiatives that promote long-term constructive relationships between young people from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds. As we all know, youth are particularly receptive when it comes to tackling stereotypes, discrimination, xenophobia, extremism, and so on, and are committed to enhancing cross-cultural understanding. Youth are key agents of positive social change when it comes to building shared societies. The Youth Solidarity Fund of the Alliance seeks to support precisely youth's efforts to build bridges within and among societies, and therefore contribute to the objectives of the Alliance in their unique manner. The Alliance of Civilizations launched the pilot phase in early 2008 with a very small budget of $100,000, and during the application period, over 110 proposals came from a total, surprisingly, 55 countries on all continents. A total of 6 outstanding projects were identified as winners and received grants, seed grants to a certain extent, ranging from $10,000 to $20,000. And the winning projects are, for example, from Argentina, France, Ghana, Philippines, and Serbia, while one is international in its focus. These 6 winning projects are quite diverse when it comes to approaches addressing conflicts fueled by cultural or religious differences. However, they all have the following things in common. They are clearly innovative, allow for honest and frank discussions between people from varied backgrounds, and provide training for youth to impact their peers and neighbors once they are back in their respective communities. Let me just add that the second stage of the Youth Solidarity Fund should be launched in the autumn of 2009, and I hope it will allow a much larger number of projects to be supported, including regional projects requiring larger funding. By the way, let me point out that the Alliance was awarded last May the first ever granted Avicenna Prize, created by a German-Turkish association, and I had the pleasure to receive a check, which is not very usual in this kind of activity, in Frankfurt, and the cash amount of which was allocated precisely to this fund. Now, my second example regards a vast project which is called Restore Trust and Rebuild Bridges, an initiative jointly promoted by the Alliance and the Anna Lindh Foundation in the wake of the Gaza crisis, with the participation of quite a vast number of partners. After a call for projects made at a meeting held in February 2009, a series of joint actions were agreed upon among the partners in order to have a contribution to help to restore trust in the Euro-Mediterranean dialogue and rebuild human and cultural bridges among societies in the region. In addition to a regional strategy, which we are beginning to work on the basis of the framework in which the Alliance operates, of course, this initiative will provide a cluster of projects, including a media-oriented rapid response mechanism to intercultural crisis in the Euro-Mediterranean region, which has as partners the Alliance and the Lindh Foundation and the European Commission. The second, a cycle of international seminars on the dialogue among civilizations of the Mediterranean, presented by the Mediterranean Universities Union, UNIMED. A workshop on conflict transformation for intercultural dialogue and overcoming hatred, as well as a peace camp promoted by the Council of Europe. A seminar on Jerusalem as a city of coexistence between monotheistic religions, with participants coming from both shores of the Mediterranean, sponsored by OIC. A training activity in capacity building addressed to Palestinian civil society institutions working in the fields of youth and culture, again by the OIC. An intercultural vadmekum by UNESCO, and a meeting of mayors of the Mediterranean coastal. Going further into this meeting of Mediterranean cities, the idea, and I'm a great believer, of city diplomacy, not because I was only a former mayor, but I do believe in it. The idea of the alliance is to take this opportunity to present to the mayors a proposal of a city diplomacy action regarding the implementation of a network of dialogue cafes in their region. I hope we can see an example of the dialogue cafe at the end of my intervention here. Now, this proposal is part of another project backed by the Alliance, the Dialogue Café Global Network, originally put forward by the well-known multinational called Cisco. You all know it. The project is based on a radical but very simple idea. What is the idea? That ordinary people have a great deal in common, and given the opportunity, will explore their common interests even across geopolitical divides. Dialogue Café links diverse groups of citizens from around the world through third-generation video conferencing technology, thereby creating a new space for social innovation and exponentially expanding our ability to address common problems and innovate as a global community. This project is being implemented by an NGO created specially for this purpose and has already received the sponsorship of the Anna Foundation, the United Cities and Local Governments, and the Gulbenkian Foundation. The intention is to develop it as a typical private-public partnership for social and cultural innovation. These are just a few concrete examples on how the Alliance of Civilization is working as a global matchmaker and as a platform of dialogue that delivers. I hope that with these examples, we clearly show how the Alliance can contribute to develop the role of soft power in international relations within the United Nations frame. Let me just finish with a brief video on this, I think, very exciting project of Dialogue Café, just to place you in the picture and finish on a more amusing note in tribute, especially to the young people that are with us here today. Thank you very much for your attention.
If you're sitting in a cafe somewhere in a city and you're having a great conversation, then it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you feel like you're at the center of the world. This picture came into my mind of what it would be like if, when I sat down at a table in a cafe in a city, some of the other people sitting at the table with me would be in a different city. What we're trying to do is directly connect people and allow them to collaborate with each other.
The fundamental problems in the 21st century are shared global problems that don't respect national boundaries. The solutions these problems demand are solutions that will require the engagement of humanity in its full diversity.
We are becoming a lot more like neighbors. It can be a lot more interesting, informative to each other's cultures as to take away prejudices or misconceptions, making the boundaries less like obstacles.
The more we can bring into the conversation colleagues, students, particularly the next generation, I think the richer the scientific, the scholarly, the social science enterprise will be.
We have to address misconceptions and fight against misconceptions by knowledge. And this is an extremely important tool for knowledge.
The project we're working in is connecting teenage girls all over the world. That we could really bring people from New York to talk to teenage girls in Istanbul and kind of empower them.
You're not aware that you're talking to a screen. You really feel that you're talking to a person.
It takes lots of money and time to travel. Could be a great opportunity to attend so many lectures around the world.
I think that the clarity that the cafe allows us to have gives a great opportunity to better understanding.
The overall direction of the cafe is driven by three pillars. that it involve people, that people work together to solve problems, that it have in mind the sustainability of the planet, and that it allows and encourages people to seek greater prosperity in their communities.
I think that the possibilities of what could grow from something like this are infinite.
Technologies don't solve problems, people solve problems. And the first thing that you've got to do is bring people together and give them the tools and the spaces to solve complex problems.